The microphone screeched for half a second, just enough to startle the quiet. Then came her voice, smooth, practiced, syrup thick with a southern tilt like it had been warmed in the pocket of a linen blazer. Some people call it luck, she said, glancing toward my husband. But I say it takes a very steady hand to guide a ship through storms. The crowd laughed. The kind of polite, hesitant laughter you hear at HR trainings or tax seminars. And I stood there, one hand resting on the back of the chair that was supposed to be mine. I didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe, not really. My champagne flute sat on the edge of the catering table, smudged with lipstick and going flat by the second. Someone had swapped my place card for hers, neatly done. Like I was never part of the seating chart to begin with. Behind the head table, a projector flickered lazily. It looped the same bland PowerPoint. Congratulations, Franklin, the years of service. Each slide had a pixelated clip, art trophy, or balloon. But no one looked at that. They were all staring at her, the secretary. Her napkin sat pristine across her lap like she'd practiced that moment, the moment she'd sit where I was meant to, where I had always sat. My name is Karen. I'm 62 years old, and this is how I turned their betrayal into my blueprint for power. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. It had taken me a week to pick my dress for the party, not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because after 38 years of marriage, you start to memorize the textures he notices. The satiny black of this particular dress reminded him of a tie he wore when we bought our first home back in Topeka. He always said it made him feel like he'd done something right. I thought wearing it tonight would feel like a full circle, but as I stood there, watching her lift the mic again, all I could feel was the weight of fabric clinging to me like something borrowed. Secretary. Some of you might know me as Frank's right hand. Others might say I've been his left brain. More laughter. A few heads turned toward my husband. He laughed too, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was that strained, tooth-showing kind of laugh he gave when he'd forgotten a birthday and hoped the flowers were enough. I didn't sit down. I couldn't, because if I sat, it would mean accepting it. Accepting her there, in my chair. At my husband's retirement party, giving a toast that should have come from me. He caught my eye once. Just a flicker. Not guilt, not surprise, just irritation. Like I was the one making a scene by standing. I moved slowly to the edge of the room, pretended to check the cake table, pretended I needed another napkin, pretend I wasn't choking on the taste of penny iron in my mouth the way your gums taste when you bite down too hard. That's when I saw it. A small black USB drive. It slipped out of her purse when she crossed her legs too fast. It slid halfway under the skirting of the tablecloth, and no one noticed but me. I didn't pick it up. Not yet. I just clocked it. Logged the location in my mind like a pin on a map. Her voice was still humming. Words like late nights, urgent meetings, and grindstone floated into the room, veiled as praise but thick with insinuation. A woman behind me whispered, I didn't know they were that close. Another, you'd think his wife would have said something. I swallowed hard. Not the words, the truth. I had said something. Weeks ago, when he told me they'd moved the retirement party to the downtown conference center instead of the country club we toured together. When he mentioned that she was helping with the slideshow. When he stopped wearing the tie I got him for his 60th. Me. Is she going to be there? Him. Of course, she's part of the team, Karen. Me. Is that all she is? Him. Jesus, don't start. He made me feel old, paranoid. I told myself it didn't matter. Let the company have its little ceremony. Let the secretary take her credit. I'd have the real moment with him later, at home. But that moment never came. He didn't come home that night. He said the guys dragged him out for a last hurrah, the kind of vague masculine excuse that evaporates under sunlight. And I let it go. Because after 38 years, you don't burn the house down over one bad night. But now, standing in a fluorescent lit ballroom with my chair occupied and my silence mistaken for consent, I knew. This wasn't a moment. It was a shift, a redirection, a rewritten ending, and I wasn't in it. Not unless I rewrote the draft myself. She lifted her glass. Secretary. To Franklin, for giving us all something to admire. The crowd echoed it, raised glasses, a few clapped. I looked down at my own, still half full, still warm from the room. I raised it too. But not toward her, not toward him, toward the tablecloth, because I knew what I had to do next. Later, as the guests began to shuffle toward the dessert table and the lights dimmed slightly for the video tribute, I circled back, slipped the USB drive into my clutch with one smooth motion. No one saw. No one looked. They were watching the screen. Photos of our wedding, his first promotion, a barbecue from 2003 where I was cropped out. One image lingered too long, him and the secretary at a conference booth smiling like they'd built the company themselves. My hands didn't shake. They should have, but they didn't, because inside that USB, I was certain wasn't just a slideshow. It was the blueprint, the receipts, the plan she thought was sealed behind her tight smile and tighter blouse. But I had it now, and I don't play nice. Not anymore. When the applause faded, the music swelled, one of those generic, corporate jazz tracks, and I felt the whole room exhale. Plates clinked, chairs scraped, and a few people rose to hug him, to pat his back, to say things they didn't mean about legacy and hard work. The secretary leaned toward him, her hand brushing the sleeve of his jacket as if she had a right to, as if she was part of the story that built him. I waited near the punch bowl. My reflection in the glass dispenser looked like a stranger. Lipstick cracked, hair frizzing slightly from the humidity, the faint sheen of sweat making my collarbone shimmer under the cheap LED lights. I pressed my thumb against the base of my throat, grounding myself. The music looped. People's voices became static. He looked relaxed, free, and for the first time in years, I realized how little of me existed in his version of that freedom. I remember thinking absurdly about our first date. A diner off Route 40 where he ordered a slice of pecan pie and couldn't stop talking about how he'd make something of himself one day. "I'll build a life we can be proud of," he'd said, fork tapping the plate. "You'll see." And I had. For decades, I'd seen him build that life, brick by brick, meeting by meeting, but every brick was laid with my time, my patience, my quiet, my youth. The secretary hadn't been there when I worked double shifts while he went back for his MBA. She wasn't the one who picked up his dry cleaning at midnight before his first big presentation. She wasn't the one who sold her grandmother's bracelet to cover the down payment on our first house. But here she was, toasting him, taking my seat. I wanted to scream, but my voice had long learned how to fold itself into silence. Years of don't make a scene, be grateful, pick your battles had sculpted me into something smaller, neater, digestible. Until tonight. As people moved toward the exit, I lingered, pretending to study the slideshow credits as they scrolled. His co-workers laughed and clustered near the doors. The secretary's perfume, something floral and expensive, hung heavy in the air, mixing with the scent of scallops and old carpet. She brushed past me on her way to the restroom, phone in hand, laughter still in her throat. I caught her reflection in the dark window. Confident, careless. She didn't notice me turn toward the table she'd vacated. I bent down, adjusting the strap on my heel, and for a fleeting second, I could still smell her lotion on the chair's armrest. A clean, clinical scent, like she'd scrubbed herself free of conscience before walking in. The USB was gone, tucked safely into the lining of my clutch. I ran my thumb over the fabric, feeling the small, hard shape beneath. It was still there, proof that she'd left more than perfume behind. "Karen, there you are," came a voice behind me. It was Nancy from HR. 8 years, pearl earrings, polite smile, always 3 drinks behind the rest. "You must be so proud." Turned, the words catching like lint. "I am," I lied. "He worked hard. He really did," she said, glancing toward the head table where Frank was still shaking hands. "And you two, you've been together since before this place even had email, right?" "Since before it had carpet," I said, forcing a smile. Nancy chuckled, oblivious. "Well, you must feel relieved. You'll finally get him all to yourself." I looked over her shoulder, at him, at the secretary still hovering nearby, whispering something that made him smirk. "All to myself," I repeated. "Imagine that." I excused myself before the tremor in my voice gave me away. In the parking lot, the night air felt sharp, cleansing. Streetlights hummed overhead, insects circling in pale halos. I could see my reflection faintly in the car window as I reached for the handle, eyes red-rimmed but steady, mouth a flat, unreadable line. I sat inside, closed the door, and let the silence hold me for a while. Then I opened my clutch. The USB glinted faintly under the dashboard light. Just a sliver of plastic, small enough to fit between 2 fingers, yet heavy with something invisible. It pulsed in my palm like a secret waiting to be told. I didn't plug it in that night. I wasn't ready. Instead, I drove home on autopilot, headlights carving brief tunnels through the dark. His suit jacket was still hanging in the back seat, faintly smelling of cedar and cologne, the same cologne she'd complimented at last year's Christmas party. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. When I reached our driveway, I sat there for several minutes, engine idling, staring at the porch light he'd installed himself, the one that flickered every time the wind shifted. It used to make me feel safe. Now it just blinked like a warning. Inside, the house was too neat. The framed photos along the hallway were all moments curated by him. The fishing trip with his buddies, the awards, the company picnics. My face appeared in only a few. Always to the side. Always mid-laugh like background noise. I poured a glass of water and leaned against the counter. The clock ticked above the stove. The champagne in my stomach turned sour. And under the hum of the refrigerator, I could still hear her voice. His left brain. I almost laughed. The absurdity of it. The entitlement. The gall. He came home past midnight, tie loosened, eyes glassy. I didn't say a word. Not when he dropped his keys on the counter, not when he mumbled something about traffic. He looked right past me, like I was furniture he'd outgrown. And I realized then, I didn't lose my seat tonight. I gave it up years ago. Tonight was just the proof. But I also had something new, something she didn't know I carried home. I looked down at my clutch again, at the faint outline of the USB through the fabric. Tomorrow, I'd find out exactly what she'd left behind. And maybe, just maybe, it would tell me who my husband really was when I wasn't looking. The house was too quiet when we got home. It always was lately. Frank tossed his keys onto the hallway console like a man clocking out from the last shift of his life. The sound was small but final. The dull clatter of metal against wood echoing through a space that used to feel warm. Now it just sounded hollow. A long exhale followed, drawn from somewhere deep in his chest, like he'd been holding it all night. No words, no glance in my direction, just the soft squeak of his loafers against the laminate floor and the slow, almost apologetic thud of the guest room door closing behind him. Not our bedroom, his door. My hand still rested on the clasp of my purse, fingers brushing the edge of the USB drive like it might vanish if I stopped touching it. A strange thing. How power can fit into something that small. I didn't follow him. I didn't call out. I just stood there in the dimness of our Kansas City ranch house, half lit by the porch light bleeding through frosted glass, and listened. No footsteps, no apologies, just silence. The kind of silence that makes you aware of everything your life has lost sound for. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and the distant sweetness of the candle I'd burned earlier, a scent called Golden Hearth. It was supposed to smell like home, but all I could smell was absence. I slipped off my heels, set them neatly by the wall, and walked into the kitchen. The tile was cold under my bare feet. The house, once full of our life, music, burnt toast, phone calls from old friends, had shrunk to refrigerator hum and creaking pipes. I poured myself a glass of boxed Cabernet. It dripped along the lip before settling in the glass, leaving a thin red streak like a cut across the counter. The first sip burned a little, then dulled into nothing. The USB was heavy in my purse, heavier than it should have been. I pulled out my laptop from the drawer, the same one he used to tease me about for keeping too many photos and not enough patience. I plugged the drive in. There was no password. That was my first surprise. The second came when the folders appeared. Neat, color-coded, meticulous. A structure too deliberate for someone who never even remembered where he left the TV remote. One master folder, retirement logistics. Inside, subfolders, slideshow final.ptx speech draft, franklin.docx, hotel receipts, Chicago trip, HR form, D5B, beneficiary change.pdf, voice memo. April 3 and 4A. I hesitated, cursor hovering over the audio file. The tiny speaker icon pulsed like a heartbeat. I clicked it. Static first, then her voice. Just print it and sign it, she said. Calm, smooth, the same syrup-thick confidence from the party. We'll submit it to HR before end of week. If she asks questions, we'll say it's procedural. A rustle of paper. A pause. Then Frank's voice. You sure they won't flag it? Her tone sharpened slightly. Not unless someone digs, and she's not the digging type. A laugh followed, soft, satisfied. The kind of laugh people share when they believed the world's already gone their way. That sound made my neck flush hot, not because it was cruel, but because it was sure. She knew me, or thought she did. The wine in my glass tasted like vinegar now. I clicked open the PDF next. It was a scanned copy of the company's official retirement form, Form D5B, the one that designates who inherits post-employment benefits, life insurance, savings allocations. I'd seen one before, years ago. My name had been written neatly across the line labeled Primary Beneficiary. This one had hers, Rachel L. Harmon. Typed cleanly, centered, approved. My name scratched out in pen, not even cleanly, just a single brutal line through it. The signature below, Frank's, supposedly, but I'd spent 38 years watching that signature trail across checks and Christmas cards. The one on the form was wrong, tilted, hesitant, like someone had practiced it too many times before committing. And the date, March 17th. 2 weeks before she took over the party planning, 2 weeks before I was told the venue had changed. My pulse thudded in my ears. I sat back in the chair, blinking hard. My name wasn't just missing from a seat that night. It was missing from everything. I opened the folder labeled Hotel Receipts, a series of scanned PDFs, each neatly titled with dates and expense codes. I clicked one. Hotel Monarch, Chicago. 2 guests, 1 room. Check-in, March 20th. Check-out, March 23rd. The same weekend he'd told me he had a board retreat. I reached into the kitchen drawer and pulled out my old leather planner, the one he'd gifted me 5 Christmases ago, embossed with my initials. I opened to March. There, in blue ink, my own handwriting. Frank, board retreat in Omaha, back Sunday. He hadn't even bothered to change the city. I sat very still, the planner open on the counter, the faint hum of the refrigerator sounding like a low, mocking note. Back then, I hadn't asked questions. I'd smiled, kissed him on the cheek, packed him travel-sized toothpaste and a sandwich for the road, because that's what a trusting wife does. But trust, I realized, isn't always noble. Sometimes it's just the prettiest word for denial. I closed the planner, pressing it shut like sealing a wound. The cursor blinked on the laptop screen, waiting, expectant. Now, I had no choice. I wasn't just being erased. I was being replaced. Monday morning came gray and slow, the sky the color of cold ash. I sat at the kitchen table, still in my robe, watching him shuffle out in his fleece jacket, the one embroidered with the company logo. He still wore it even though the company no longer paid him to. Habit or pride, I couldn't tell which. He didn't even glance my way, just grabbed his car keys and muttered, "Getting coffee." The door clicked shut. I waited a full minute before dialing. "Benefits department, this is Amelia." A bright nasal voice answered. "Hi," I said. "I'm calling about my husband's retirement paperwork, Franklin Thompson." "Sure thing," she chirped. "Do you have his employee ID?" "Yes, 746291. I could hear her typing, the clack of nails on keys. "What's the issue, Mrs. Thompson?" I forced calm into my voice. "We just noticed a small discrepancy. It might be an outdated version of the D5B form. Could you confirm the beneficiary listed?" "Of course. Just a sec." She went quiet, the faint whir of a printer somewhere behind her filling the pause. When she came back, her tone had shifted, gentle but cautious. "It lists a Rachel L. Harmon, not you, ma'am." I stared at the counter. The pattern in the laminate swam like water. "Not Karen?" "No, ma'am. Rachel L. Harmon. The form was received March 17th, notarized March 19th. My throat felt tight. "Thank you," I said softly. "That clears it up." I hung up before my voice cracked. Outside, the recycling truck rattled past, the same one that always came too early and too loud. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked twice, then stopped. I sat there, phone still in my hand, staring at the sink full of rinsed dishes. I couldn't cry. Not yet. Because if I started, I knew I wouldn't stop. Instead, I opened a new folder on my desktop. Named it Proof. I dragged everything from the USB into it. Then I copied that folder to an external drive. Then I emailed it to myself. And finally, I sent a hidden copy to Janice in Iowa, my oldest friend. She'd worked in HR before retiring early. She owed me a favor, and more importantly, she understood what paper trails could do. Next call. Not a lawyer, Not yet. Cynthia. Frank's daughter from his first marriage. We hadn't spoken much in years, different cities, different holidays, mutual awkwardness. But I remembered the look she gave me at the party, when the secretary toasted, when my chair sat empty. Cynthia hadn't smiled. She'd stared at her plate like it had started bleeding, so I dialed. She answered on the third ring. Hello? It's Karen. A pause, the faint shuffle of movement on her end. I figured, she said. I'm not calling to ask you to take sides, I told her. Okay. But I need to know if you've seen anything, heard anything about Rachel. Another pause, longer this time. Then quietly. You mean besides her riding shotgun in his life for the last year? My chest tightened. So it's true. Yeah, she said. It's true. I've seen things. Would you be willing to help me prove it? If it means making him face what he's done, yes. Something in her tone, steady, grounded, made me exhale for the first time in hours, and just like that, I had an ally, a quiet one, but one with access. Within days, Cynthia sent me what she found. Old emails, lunch receipts charged to the corporate card, a security camera still from the office parking lot. It showed Frank and Rachel by his car, her hand pressed to his chest, his tie crooked, his expression relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in years. The timestamp, Tuesday, 11:47 p.m. I added it to the proof folder. The evidence wasn't just stacking, it was solidifying. That night, we ate dinner in silence. Roast chicken, canned green beans, a wedge of leftover retirement cake, the icing now brittle and curling at the edges. He didn't look up once. Fork, bite, chew, swallow. The rhythm of a man who'd already left but hadn't yet moved out. I watched him quietly. The slump of his shoulders, the little wrinkle at his temple that used to melt under my thumb when we danced in the kitchen years ago. Now it just looked like a crack in the plaster of a house no one was maintaining. He cleared his throat once, muttered something about the coffee shop being crowded. I nodded, pretending to listen, while my mind cataloged everything. The tone, the timing, the lies. Because I wasn't a wife anymore. I was an archive, a witness, a case being built. And he didn't even know it. The copy machine at the public library whirred like a tired old animal. Each sheet slid out in slow rhythm. HR forms, receipts, screenshots, proof. My proof. The machine exhaled faintly after every page, as if even it understood the weight of what it was producing. I stood close, palms resting on the metal edge, the warmth from the fluorescent tube above tinting my skin pale. I'd chosen mid-morning for a reason. That hour when the world feels half awake and uninterested in strangers. The only company, a retired English teacher in a turtleneck marking grammar worksheets with a red pen, and a teenager pretending to study for the GED but mostly scrolling his phone under the desk. The quiet was perfect, sterile. I didn't want eyes on me, not yet, not until every line and timestamp was locked into place. I fed another document into the tray. The machine hiccuped, then resumed. When the stack was done, I gathered each warm page with careful fingers and aligned the corners against the table, my rhythm precise, methodical, almost ceremonial. I slipped them into a manila folder, its edges soft from use, and scrawled across the front in blue Sharpie, for review. The smell of toner hung in the air. I smiled at the librarian as I passed the front desk. She was a woman in her late 50s with hair pinned up in a sensible bun, the kind of woman who could spot trouble from half a mile away, but chose not to if she sensed your pain was private. She just nodded, her eyes soft. Kansas folks don't pry unless you're bleeding or missing. Outside, the air felt thinner. Early spring chill, sky low and gray. I walked to my car slowly, folder pressed to my chest like a heartbeat. I couldn't risk dropping. Back home, the house greeted me with its usual stale quiet. The faint smell of aging wood polish and last night's microwave vegetables still clung to the air. I didn't turn on the lights, just opened the blinds a little, letting cold sunlight crawl across the counters and find the surfaces Frank hadn't touched in weeks. It illuminated the dust on the TV stand, the faint coffee ring on the table from a mug he hadn't bothered to rinse, the grooves in the hardwood where his chair used to scrape during breakfast. Little fossils of a life lived out of habit. In the hallway, the wedding photo still hung crooked. The frame's corners were beginning to peel, and the print inside had started to yellow. I reached up and brushed off the thin film of dust. Our faces stared back, young, unlined, impossibly sure. The day itself came back in pieces, the scent of cut grass, the way Aunt Jean's perfume floated between laughter and champagne, the photographer shouting for one more shot before the light died. Frank had kissed my forehead right before the shutter clicked. His hand had squeezed mine like he'd never let go. He used to hold my hand like it was the only solid thing in a world made of wind. Now he barely looked up when we brushed shoulders in the kitchen. By Thursday, the investigation in my head had hardened into something real. I built a timeline. Straight lines, clean order. March 17th, HR beneficiary form changed. April 3rd, voice memo recording between Rachel and Frank. May 9th, Chicago hotel receipt. June 2nd, email thread referencing final transfer paperwork. June 14th, retirement party where my name was erased from the seat. Each line was another step in the excavation. That morning, Cynthia sent me a forwarded email. Subject line, wrap it up clean. It was from Rachel. Rachel, she'll figure it out eventually, but as long as everything's signed, there's nothing she can do legally. The rest is just noise. Let her make noise. Noise. That's what I'd become. An aftershock, an inconvenience, a sound you learn to tune out. I read the message 3 times, my stomach clenched tight, a pulse beating behind my temples. I called Cynthia. Do you think she forged his signature? I asked, voice barely steady. If she didn't, she coached him, she said flatly. Same difference. Would you be willing to say that in a statement? There was a pause on the line. Then, if it's notarized, yeah, I will. We met at a small notary office 2 towns over, a beige building sandwiched between a pawn shop and an old diner. No one would recognize us there. Cynthia wore dark sunglasses and a ball cap, her hair pulled back tight. I brought the folder, heavy and precise. Inside, the air smelled like paper and toner. The notary was a man in suspenders with a coffee stain on his tie. He didn't ask questions, just looked over the document, stamped it. With a quick, mechanical motion. The sound, the deep, resonant ka-chunk, hit me harder than I expected. It was final. It was real. He slid the paper back toward me. I nodded once, hands trembling as I tucked it into the folder. Notarized, official, irreversible. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of exhaust and fried onions from the diner. Cynthia exhaled through her nose, slow and tired. You sure you want to do this? She asked. I'm done wanting, I said. I'm just doing. Back home, I added the stamped affidavit to the growing pile. The folder had grown thick. Dozens of pages, every one weighted with consequence. I'd already drafted my statement, just the facts in chronological order. No emotion, just documentation. But I'd also written an opening line, one I practiced in the mirror each night until it felt carved into me. She erased my name. I made sure hers would never be written in ink again. It wasn't metaphor anymore. It was mission. I pressed the folder closed, smoothing the edges, feeling its density. It wasn't just paper now. It was gravity. Next step, make it public. Not in a scream, not with tears or broken glass. I wanted quiet devastation, the kind of silence that doesn't end. It echoes. I called Cynthia again. Ready for the next phase? I asked. I've been ready, she said. Tell me what to do. So I told her. We'd used the company's quarterly all-hands meeting. Frank had been invited to give a retirement reflection. Rachel was coordinating logistics, which made the symmetry almost poetic. Cynthia would send the first message. Cynthia. Hey, Rachel. Dad asked if I could intro his slideshow. Just a little surprise moment. You know how he is. Rachel. Ah, that's sweet. Sure, we'll cue you in. We both knew Frank hadn't asked her for anything, but Rachel didn't check. She saw a daughter, not a detonator. I booked a print service downtown, the kind that handled professional reports. Heavy, glossy paper, matte covers, full-color prints. 50 copies. Each one bound and stapled, labeled with a clean header. Timeline of events and supporting documentation. Inside, the emails, the receipts, the HR forms, the notarized affidavit. The evidence was clinical, beautiful in its precision. I also uploaded everything to a private Dropbox. The shared link was pre-scheduled to go live at 3:07 p.m., the exact minute the projector would power on during Frank's speech. The plan was quiet, surgical. If everything went right, the truth would unfold like a curtain drop, no shouting required. Sunday night arrived heavy and humid. The air pressed close against the windows, the smell of rain thickening outside. I stood in the guest room, his room now. The closet door was slightly ajar. Inside, his suits hung in neat rows, all the same shades of blue and gray. The scent of Aramis clung to the air, musky and dry. I pulled out the old retirement file box I'd packed months ago when I thought this chapter was over. I opened it carefully, the cardboard edges scratching my fingers. The files were lined up neatly. Old pay stubs, performance reviews, certificates. Everything except one document, the form that used to have my name on it, but tucked behind the bottom lining was something else. A folded receipt, not for a hotel, for a ring. I unfolded it slowly. The paper was thin, crisp, still carrying a faint perfume from the store, purchased on his corporate card. 2 weeks after Valentine's Day. Engraving line, 2R for the next chapter. My breath caught. The card had never flagged it. Corporate expenses had a way of forgiving personal sins if wrapped in the right spreadsheet code. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the receipt. The rain began tapping the window, soft but relentless. Now I had it. The proof of permanence. The final nail in the illusion. I scanned it, labeled it Appendix E, and added it to the Dropbox folder. Then I sent Cynthia a text. Cynthia, you ready for this? Me. I've never been more ready. And I meant it. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I needed to become undeniable. The parking garage under the office building hummed with that low fluorescent buzz that always made my head ache. The air was stale, half exhaust, half humidity. It smelled faintly of burnt rubber and old paint. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead like they were gasping through their final hour, their hum echoing against concrete pillars painted with fading yellow numbers. Cynthia and I arrived separately. That had been the plan. She pulled in first, sleek and steady, the kind of woman who knew how to blend into a system before breaking it. She wore a fitted navy blazer and carried a plain black laptop bag. No jewelry, no perfume, just precision. I came 10 minutes later, the same dress from the retirement party hanging heavy against my skin. The satiny black one Frank used to love. I'd pressed it the night before, smoothed every wrinkle, buttoned the back by feel. I wanted it to be the last thing he saw before everything shifted. A ghost from the night he didn't realize was the beginning of his undoing. It was just past 2:30 p.m. The all-hands started at 3. We'd rehearsed it for days, quietly, carefully. Every line, every cue. No confrontation, no shouting, just a slow, suffocating truth. The kind that spreads without sound. I parked in a corner space near the elevator, the one marked visitor. The irony didn't miss me. I wasn't a visitor here once. I used to bring Frank lunch during late shifts, hand him coffee through the side door, wave to his team on Fridays. They'd called me Mrs. Thompson with cheerful politeness. Now, if they saw me, they'd just see the headline waiting to happen. I grabbed my clutch, checked the envelope inside one last time, the folder labeled for review, and stepped into the elevator. Cynthia was already inside. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She watched the numbers above the door tick upward, her reflection cutting through the chrome panel. I stared at mine beside hers, my hair pinned, lipstick calm, eyes steady. I didn't look like a woman seeking revenge. I looked like someone who'd run out of chances to be nice. The elevator chimed. When the doors opened, the air changed. It was colder up here, cleaner, perfumed with corporate neutrality, coffee, copier paper, and anxiety. The buzz of conversation floated in waves. The hum of computers, the faint laugh of someone trying too hard. Rachel stood near the podium. Burgundy wrap dress, hair perfectly curled, a microphone between her fingers like it belonged there. She was laughing with someone from payroll, brushing invisible lint off her sleeve, adjusting the mic with that syrupy calm I'd heard before. Same tone, same performance. The conference room itself was cavernous. Rows of gray chairs, a projection screen stretched across the front wall, the company logo plastered on the backdrop. The staff filtered in slowly. HR, logistics, even the mailroom clerks. All faces that had nodded politely at Frank's name for decades. People who believed they knew him. A few recognized me, smiled. I smiled back. They had no idea. The projector glowed a soft blue. The slideshow already cued. The company anthem played faintly through ceiling speakers, a hollow instrumental meant to inspire teamwork. "Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming." Rachel's voice carried easily, her southern lilt sweet enough to coat arsenic. "We'll get started in just a minute." Cynthia moved smoothly through the crowd. She stopped by the tech table where a young man in a lanyard was setting up the HDMI connection. She leaned down and smiled politely. "Hey," she whispered. "Frank wanted a last-minute slide swap. It's in Dropbox. Link's on this flash drive. Just play that file instead, okay?" The assistant blinked once, then shrugged. "Sure thing." No suspicion, no questions. Rachel didn't even turn around. Cynthia slipped to the far side of the room, blending into the line of executives near the wall. I took my seat near the back, next to the exit sign. From there, I could see everything. The podium, the crowd, the doorway, every exit, every eye. 3:01 p.m. The lights dimmed. The low hum of the projector filled the silence. Rachel stepped up to the mic, her voice smooth as ever. "Before we start the slideshow," she began, "I just want to say a few words on behalf of Franklin." Her tone slid into that familiar cadence, warm, performative. "His dedication," she said, "his leadership, his heart for this company." Buzzwords wrapped in charm. I could almost predict every line. Then, a faint flicker. The screen behind her shifted. First slide, a scanned HR form. Form D5B, beneficiary update, highlighted text. My name. Crossed out, her name replacing it. Then came the side-by-side signature comparison. His real one, her forgery. A murmur rippled through the seats, heads tilted, confusion blooming like slow heat. Rachel's smile faltered. Can we pause this for a second?" And the projector ignored her. Next slide, a hotel receipt, then a photo, then another, a dinner for two, the ring purchase, and then an email in large text. "Rachel, she'll figure it out eventually, but as long as everything's signed, there's nothing she can do legally. The rest is just noise. Let her make noise." Someone gasped, loudly. Another whispered, "Is this real?" Rachel's hand trembled on the mic. Who changed the file?" she asked, voice cracking. The room was frozen, like a still frame waiting for sound to catch up. Then Cynthia stepped forward. No drama, no theatrics, just calm authority, the kind that made people listen even when they didn't want to. "I know some of you are confused," she said. Her voice echoed cleanly through the mic still hanging from its stand. "My father changed his retirement beneficiary under questionable circumstances. What you're seeing are verified documents." The air thinned. She turned to Rachel, eyes sharp, voice steady. "You wanted to run the show," she said. "Here's your spotlight." The words landed like a blade sliding into silence. Rachel's fingers slipped. The microphone fell. It hit the floor with a dull thunk. The sound carried farther than any shout could have. For a long moment, nobody moved. The slideshow continued flickering behind her. Emails, receipts, dates, proof stacking on proof until the truth was undeniable. Then the tech assistant fumbled to stop it, hands shaking, his face pale. The screen froze mid-image, and that's when the doors opened. Frank walked in. Late, as always. Coffee in hand, smile wide. He looked around, expecting applause. Then he saw the screen. The silence. The stillness of 100 faces turned toward him. The smile cracked like porcelain. Cynthia's voice cut the air. "You should sit down, Dad." "What?" His voice faltered. "What is this?" Rachel turned toward him, eyes wide, mouth trembling. "You said this would be buried," she whispered. "I didn't," he started, but stopped, his face drained of color. "I thought we..." He didn't finish. Couldn't. The assistant finally hit the power button. The screen went black. The lights came back on, bright, merciless. The spell shattered, leaving only the aftermath. HR reps stood slowly, exchanging looks. Someone from legal began writing names down. Compliance whispered to each other, their pens clicking like insects. No one said my name, but every head turned as I walked forward, not fast, just enough to be seen. The sound of my heels echoed in the stunned quiet. I approached the podium, folder in hand. "For HR," I said, softly. "For legal. For everyone who ever asked where I was during all those meetings." I placed it beside the fallen microphone. The thud was small but final. Rachel's lips were pressed so tight they'd gone white. She didn't speak, didn't move. Frank stood frozen near the doorway, his cup still in hand, cooling fast. And I walked away. No drama, no tears, no speeches. Just the steady rhythm of my heels against the carpet and the cool breath of the stairwell waiting for me at the end of the hall. By the time I reached my car, my hands were shaking. Not from fear, from release. It was done. Not over, but done. The next morning, I didn't check my phone, didn't open the news, didn't scroll. The urge was there, twitching under my skin like muscle memory, but I ignored it. I moved through the kitchen on autopilot, hands steady, feet bare on cold tile. I made coffee. Real coffee. Not the pod kind Frank liked, but the French press I'd kept tucked away behind a row of forgotten mugs. I ground the beans by hand, slow and deliberate, the smell rich and sharp. The kettle hissed on the stove, a steady white noise that filled the kind of silence I'd once been afraid of. I poured, waited for the bloom, then pressed down gently until the foam gave way. The sound was small, comforting. I sat by the window, the same window where I'd watched him mow the lawn 100 times, and wrapped both hands around the mug. The morning light was soft. Kansas spring light, thin, uncertain, pale and clean, like it hadn't quite decided what kind of day it wanted to be. The trees outside were still wet from last night's rain. Drops clung to the glass like punctuation marks that hadn't been placed yet. And for the first time in months, the silence didn't scare me. No footsteps down the hall, no rustle of a newspaper half read aloud for effect, no clink of a spoon against his chipped mug, the one with the faded company logo. He hadn't come home, not that I expected him to. Cynthia told me later that he left the all hands with Rachel, but without speaking. Walked right past HR straight out the door, as though silence might still protect him. But silence doesn't erase paper trails. Someone from HR called her that night, a courtesy update not meant to spread, but word travels fast when compliance is involved. A forensic audit had already been triggered. The beneficiary change flagged within minutes once my folder hit the podium. You don't mess with corporate benefits, not quietly. By the time morning came, the wheels were turning faster than even I could have planned. That afternoon, I drove downtown to the county clerk's office. The building was old, square, and honest, brick with faded paint and a glass door that stuck halfway before opening. I walked in, the smell of paper and cleaning solvent heavy in the air. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed like angry bees. The second floor housed the filing department. The carpet was thin as sandpaper, edges fraying from years of foot traffic. Each step sounded too loud, too real. Behind the counter sat a woman in her 50s with glasses perched low on her nose. Her name tag read, Darlene. She didn't smile when she looked up, but there was something kind in the way her eyebrows lifted, like she already knew this wasn't about taxes or parking tickets. I need to file a complaint, I said. Potential financial fraud, married filing, retirement plan manipulation. She nodded once. Got documentation? I slid the envelope across the counter. All notarized. She flipped through it. HR forms, signature comparisons, statements, marriage certificate, copies of benefit terms. Her thumb paused once over the highlighted section, then kept going. All right, she murmured. She stamped the first page. Ka-thunk, then the second. The sound echoed sharp and final in the empty office. Each strike of the ink was a small victory. When she finished, she looked at me just long enough to meet my eyes. You did your homework, she said quietly. I had to, I replied. She didn't ask another question, just slid the stack into a tray marked processing and nodded toward the door. That was all I needed. The sound of that final stamp was enough. I walked back outside into the wind. The air was cool, alive. Somewhere down the street, a bus hissed to a stop. A man in a blue cap held the door for me without looking up. I thanked him anyway. Later, when I finally opened my laptop, the numbers spoke for themselves. The Dropbox link, my silent bomb, had been viewed 327 times. Shared 19. Someone had leaked it to a company blog. Anonymous tip. They'd quoted my line at the top of the post, bold and centered against a white background. She erased my name. I made sure hers would never be written in ink again. I read it once, then again. I didn't flinch. It didn't feel like exposure. It felt like acknowledgement. 2 days later, my phone buzzed. Frank, you've humiliated me. I stared at the screen, coffee cup warm in my hand. Then I typed back, slow, deliberate. Me. No, you did that. I just turned the volume up. It took him 6 minutes to reply. Frank, I didn't want it to be like this. Me. Then you should have left my chair alone. I didn't message again. He didn't either. The thread went cold, and I didn't need it to continue. Within the week, the legal review confirmed what I already knew. The signature on the D5B form had been digitally traced. Forensic software flagged inconsistencies, the pressure points, the overlapping pixels, the faint dragline from a stylus. Rachel's work login had been used to submit the file. Both of them lost their pensions. Rachel was dismissed in silence. No public notice, no email blast, just a disappearance from the directory. Frank's severance was frozen pending review. Cynthia didn't celebrate. Neither did I. She came by the next Sunday carrying a pan of lemon bars still warm and a paper bag filled with old family photos. The air smelled like sugar and spring dust. We sat in the backyard under the maple tree. The same one Frank had planted 30 years ago, back when everything still felt possible. The bark was split now, but the roots were strong. No makeup, no small talk, just sunlight filtering through new leaves and the faint hum of distant traffic. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then she said quietly, "They're saying she's leaving town." "Good," I said. "Dad?" "Probably hiding behind her shadow." She nodded, chewing a corner of her lemon bar. After a while, I asked, "Did you ever love him?" She looked out toward the fence, thoughtful. "Not the way he wanted," she said. "I think I saw through him too early." I smiled faintly. "I think I saw too late." She didn't argue. We just sat there, two women tethered by the same man, but free of him now. Different wounds, same scar tissue. The breeze lifted the edge of one of the photos in her lap. It was an old Christmas shot. Me, Frank, and Cynthia when she was a teenager. She laughed, holding a mug of cocoa. Frank's arm was around us both. I almost didn't recognize my own face. Hopeful. Blindingly hopeful. I let the photo go when it slipped from her hand. The wind caught it, carried it halfway across the yard, and left it face down in the grass. I didn't pick it up. The next week, I started packing his things. Not out of anger, out of clarity. I folded each shirt, labeled each box, pressed masking tape across the flaps. I worked slowly, like I was closing the last pages of a long book. His shoes, his cufflinks, his golf trophies. I left it all lined up in the garage, neat rows under the dim bulb. On the last box, I stuck a yellow note, "Pick up by Friday, or I'll donate." He came Thursday afternoon. I heard the garage door, the faint shuffle of boxes being lifted, then silence. He didn't knock, didn't call. By the time I stepped outside, the boxes were gone. The concrete was bare except for a single screw that must have fallen loose from one of the lids. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, the one where we'd eaten thousands of quiet dinners. I traced the groove my hand had worn into the wood over the years. The indentation was small, smooth. Habit made physical. The next morning, I ordered new chairs. 4 of them. Simple, oak, unscarred. When they arrived, I replaced the old ones without ceremony. I needed new grooves. The last thing I did was rehang the wedding photo. But this time, I cropped it, took out his side, just me, a younger me, smiling without knowing what came after. I put the frame back on the wall, the nail biting into the plaster. The photo leaned slightly, but it didn't matter. It was enough. I waited for the tears, but they never came. Because it wasn't grief anymore. It was release. The revenge had never really been in the slideshow or the paperwork. It was in the silence, in the space left behind once noise was gone, in reclaiming the quiet he used to fill with explanations and excuses. It was in walking away while they fell apart behind me. It was in making the truth unerasable. They took my seat. I took back the table. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.